The rain hammered against the concrete outside Naval Station Norfolk like artillery fire, each drop a small explosion in the gathering darkness. Inside the base commissary, Master Chief Petty Officer Victoria Reyes stood in line clutching a basket containing nothing but coffee and instant noodles, the kind of sustenance that had fueled her through 23 years of service. She wore civilian clothes, a faded university sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. To anyone watching, she looked like a tired spouse picking up groceries after a long day. No one in that fluorescent-lit store would guess that 72 hours earlier, she had been coordinating a hostage extraction in the Horn of Africa from a command center aboard the USS Bataan, directing SEAL team operators through a compound with the precision of a surgeon and the calm of someone who had done this dance 100 times before. The mission had gone clean. 18 hostages extracted, 0 casualties, operators back on the float before the sun rose over the Indian Ocean. Now she stood in line behind a young family, listening to their toddler sing nonsense syllables, feeling the weight of operational fatigue settle into her bones like sediment. The man appeared beside her without warning, his presence aggressive in the way certain people occupy space, as though the world owed them room. Marine Captain Derek Hastings, his uniform crisp despite the late hour, his jaw set in that particular expression Victoria had seen countless times, the face of someone who believed rank was a weapon rather than a responsibility. She recognized him vaguely from joint operations briefings, one of those mid-level officers who confused volume with authority. He didn't look at her directly, just positioned himself too close, forcing her to shift her basket. "Excuse me," Victoria said quietly, her voice carrying none of the command weight it held in tactical operations centers, none of the steel that made operators twice her size snap to attention. Hastings glanced at her dismissively, then reached past her to grab a magazine from the rack, his arm deliberately crossing her space. "Military spouses," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, speaking to no one in particular. "Think they run the place because they're married to someone with rank." Victoria felt something cold settle in her chest, not anger but a kind of weary recognition. She had encountered this particular flavor of disrespect before, this assumption that a woman in civilian clothes couldn't possibly be anything more than an appendage to someone else's career. The commissary hummed with ordinary life around them, scanner beeps and conveyor belt rumbles, completely unaware that the next 60 seconds would become a story whispered through military installations from San Diego to Bahrain, a legend that would be told and retold in ready rooms and enlisted clubs, growing with each telling until it achieved the status of myth. Victoria set her basket down with deliberate care. She turned to face Hastings fully for the first time, her expression neutral, almost pleasant. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice still quiet, still unremarkable. "Do you think I'm someone's spouse?" Hastings finally looked at her directly, his eyes tracking over her civilian clothes, her lack of visible rank, the absence of any military bearing in her relaxed posture. His expression shifted into something uglier, a smirk that carried the weight of assumed superiority. "Aren't you? Let me guess, your husband's what, an E6? Maybe a junior officer if you're lucky." The people around them continued shopping, oblivious. The cashier scanned items with mechanical efficiency. The toddler's singing grew louder, a counterpoint to the tension building in this small space. "No," Victoria said simply. Something in her tone made Hastings pause, some frequency below the words that registered as warning. But he was committed now, his ego demanding he continue. "Then what are you doing shopping at a base commissary? You know there are regulations about who can use these facilities." Victoria reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately. She pulled out her military ID and held it up between them, close enough for him to read but not so close it seemed aggressive. The fluorescent lights caught the laminated surface, illuminating the text, the photo, the rank. Hastings' eyes focused on the ID. His smirk faltered, then collapsed entirely. The blood drained from his face in a way that would have been comical if Victoria had been in any mood to find humor in the situation. Master Chief Petty Officer Victoria Reyes, Naval Special Warfare Command, Tactical Operations Commander. "Oh fuck," Hastings whispered, the profanity escaping before he could contain it. His hand moved instinctively toward a salute before he caught himself, remembering she was in civilian clothes, remembering they were in a public space, remembering that he had just catastrophically misjudged the situation. Victoria pocketed her ID with the same deliberate motion she had used to retrieve it. She picked up her basket again, her movements unhurried. "I'm shopping here," she said, her voice still conversational, still quiet, "because I've been stationed at this base for 6 years. I'm shopping in civilian clothes because I've been in a classified operations center for 72 consecutive hours and didn't feel like changing before picking up coffee. And I'm shopping alone because I'm not married, Captain. I'm too busy commanding the tactical operations for the teams that go downrange when conventional forces can't get the job done." The woman behind them in line had stopped loading her groceries onto the conveyor belt. The cashier had paused mid-scan. The tactical awareness that made Victoria exceptional at her job told her they had an audience now, that this moment was expanding beyond the two people at its center. Hastings opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Master Chief, I apologize, I shouldn't have." "You shouldn't have assumed," Victoria interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying an edge now, sharp enough to cut through excuses. "You saw someone in civilian clothes and made a series of assumptions about who they were, what they did, and what respect they deserved. That's not a mistake, Captain. That's a failure of judgment." She could have left it there. The smart play, the political play, would be to accept his stammered apology and move on, to let him save face and avoid making an enemy of a Marine officer who might sit on joint operations boards or have friends in positions that mattered. But Victoria hadn't survived 2 decades in naval special warfare by playing smart politically. She had survived by being honest, by demanding excellence, and by refusing to let small injustices pass unchallenged because they were inconvenient. "Do you know what my call sign is, Captain?" Hastings shook his head mutely. "Lighthouse, do you know why?" Another shake. The audience around them had grown. An older man in a Navy captain's uniform had stopped pushing his cart, watching with the intensity of someone recognizing something significant was unfolding. A young sailor stood frozen in the canned goods aisle, her eyes wide. "Because when the teams are operating in zero visibility, when everything's gone to shit and they can't see 2 feet in front of them, I'm the voice in their ear telling them where to go. I'm the fixed point they navigate by, steady, reliable, always there." Victoria shifted her basket to her other hand. "You know what that requires, Captain? It requires trust. It requires those operators to believe that the voice giving them directions knows what it's doing, knows the terrain, knows the mission, knows them." The rain outside had intensified, a roar against the building's roof that matched the rushing sound Hastings probably heard in his ears right now, the sound of a career moment sliding sideways into disaster. And you know what destroys that trust faster than anything? Assumptions. When you assume someone isn't capable because of how they look, or what they're wearing, or what gender they are, you create an environment where people stop trusting their judgment. They start second-guessing. And in my world, Captain, second-guessing gets people killed. "Master Chief, I understand, I just—" "Let me finish." The words were soft but carried absolute authority. Hastings' mouth snapped shut. "I'm not telling you this because I'm offended, though I am. I'm not telling you this because I want an apology, though you owe me one. I'm telling you this because in 6 months or a year, you might be sitting in a joint operations briefing, and someone who doesn't look like what you think a tactical expert should look like is going to give you advice that could save your Marines' lives. And if you've spent your career making assumptions based on appearances, you might ignore that advice. And people will die because you couldn't see past your own prejudices." The store had gone completely quiet now. Even the toddler had stopped singing. The moment stretched out, pregnant with potential, the kind of moment that could define careers or destroy them, depending on what happened next. Hastings stood at attention despite the civilian environment, despite the impropriety. His face had gone from pale to red, shame and anger warring visibly. Victoria watched him process, watched the emotions cycle through. She had seen this before too, this moment when someone confronted with their own bias had to choose between defensiveness and growth. "You're right," Hastings said finally, his voice strained but steady. "Master Chief, you're absolutely right. I made assumptions that were inappropriate and unprofessional. I spoke to you with disrespect. I'm sorry." Victoria studied him for a long moment. The apology seemed genuine, but words were easy. Actions would tell the real story. "Apology noted, Captain. Now let me ask you something. Do you know who Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb is?" Hastings blinked at the apparent subject change. "No, Master Chief. He's a SEAL team commander. 6'2", built like a linebacker, looks like he was sent from central casting to play a special operations officer in a movie. Exactly what you'd picture when you think elite warrior." "Okay." "He's also the worst tactical decision-maker I've ever worked with. Got 6 operators wounded in Ramadi because he couldn't adapt his plan when the situation changed. Now do you know who Lieutenant Sarah Chen is?" The name triggered recognition in Hastings' expression. Yes, the SEAL who made the news for being 5'4" and Asian and female, yes. Also for being the best close-quarters battle specialist in the teams, with more confirmed solo extractions than anyone in her peer group. The media focused on how she looked. Her teammates focus on how she performs. Victoria shifted her weight slightly, a subtle movement that suggested she was preparing to disengage. "Here's my point, Captain. You're Marine infantry. Your job is to lead men and women in combat. That job requires you to evaluate capability accurately, regardless of packaging. Webb looked perfect for the role and was terrible at it. Chen didn't fit anyone's mental image and was extraordinary. If you can't learn to see the difference, you're a liability to your Marines." "I understand, Master Chief." "Do you?" Victoria's voice wasn't challenging, just genuinely curious. "Or do you understand that you got caught saying something inappropriate to someone senior to you in rank and influence, and you're managing the situation?" The question hung between them like smoke. Hastings' jaw worked for a moment before he answered. "Honestly, both. I'm embarrassed I got caught, but I'm also hearing what you're saying about the actual problem." It was a more honest answer than Victoria had expected. "That's good. Embarrassment fades. The lesson needs to stick." She paused, considering. "Your 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines." "Yes, Master Chief." "I'm briefing your battalion commander next week on Joint Special Operations integration. I'm going to tell him we need better cross-training between conventional forces and special operations elements. I'm going to recommend you for the working group." Hastings looked stunned. "Master Chief, why would you?" "Because you're going to remember this conversation every single day of that assignment. And because the working group needs people who have learned this lesson viscerally, not academically. You just got a master class in why assumptions are dangerous. Now you're going to help make sure other officers don't make the same mistakes." The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm, no longer artillery fire but persistent and thorough, soaking into everything. Victoria picked up her basket again, signaling the conversation was ending. "One more thing, Captain." "Yes, Master Chief." "The next time you see someone in civilian clothes on base, someone who doesn't immediately read as military to you, consider that they might be coming off a 72-hour operation. They might be one of the quiet professionals who do the work that never makes the news. They might be exactly the person you'd want in your corner when everything goes sideways." She moved toward the checkout. "Or they might be someone's spouse, doing the incredibly hard work of keeping a family together while their partner deploys repeatedly. Either way, they deserve your respect, not your assumptions. Victoria paid for her coffee and noodles without looking back. She could feel Hastings still standing there, could feel the eyes of everyone who had witnessed the exchange. The story was already spreading, she knew. By morning, it would be in every ready room on base. By next week, it would have reached other installations. By next month, it would be a legend with its own life, details changing with each retelling but the core remaining. The day a Marine captain learned that rank, expertise, and authority don't always come in the package you expect. Outside, the rain soaked through her sweatshirt within seconds. Victoria tilted her face up to it, letting the cold water wash away some of the fatigue, some of the frustration. She thought about the SEAL operators she had guided through the compound 72 hours ago, their voices calm and professional in her headset, trusting her completely because they knew her capability. That trust had been earned over years, mission after mission, decision after decision. It wasn't given because of her rank or her uniform. It was given because she had proven herself in the only way that mattered in their world, performance under pressure. She wondered if Hastings would learn that lesson, if he would evolve beyond the embarrassment of getting caught into genuine growth. Some people did. Some people stayed defensive their whole careers, never quite able to admit when they were fundamentally wrong about something important. Victoria walked to her truck through the downpour, her groceries clutched against her chest. The base was quiet around her, lights glowing through the rain like distant stars. Somewhere on this installation, planning was underway for the next mission, the next operation, the next time American forces would need precision and expertise in a place where mistakes meant body bags. And when that mission kicked off, it wouldn't matter what the operators looked like or what gender they were or whether they fit some Hollywood image of what a warrior should be. It would only matter whether they could do the job. That was the world Victoria lived in. That was the standard she held herself to and demanded from others. Capability over appearance, performance over perception, results over reputation. She started the truck and sat for a moment, letting the heater begin its work against the chill. Her phone buzzed. A message from Captain Briggs, her direct commander at Naval Special Warfare. Heard you had an interesting interaction at the commissary. The whole base is talking. You okay? Victoria smiled slightly and typed back, gave a teaching moment. Time will tell if the student learned anything. 3 dots appeared then. Your teaching moments tend to become legend. Pretty sure this one's already at that status. Get some rest. We briefed the Admiral on the Horn extraction at 800. The Admiral? Right. Tomorrow she would stand in front of a flag officer and walk through every decision made during the operation, justifying timing and tactics and resource allocation. She would do it wearing her uniform, every ribbon and device visible, her authority clear and unambiguous. But the work itself, the actual commanding of tactical operations, the guiding of operators through hostile territory, that happened in headsets and operations centers where what mattered was the steadiness of your voice and the accuracy of your judgment. Victoria pulled out of the parking lot, windshield wipers beating against the rain, and thought about call signs. Every operator had one, that nickname that captured something essential about them, chosen by their teammates not for flattery but for truth. Lighthouse. She had earned that name 5 years ago during an operation in Syria when everything had gone wrong, when a simple reconnaissance mission had turned into a running gunfight, and the team had gotten separated in an urban maze with enemy fighters closing in from 3 directions. Victoria had stayed on comms for 18 straight hours, her voice never wavering, guiding each operator to rally points, coordinating extraction, adapting the plan in real time as the situation evolved. When they finally got everyone back to base, the team leader had looked at her with exhausted respect and said, "You were the lighthouse in the storm. We couldn't see shit, but we could hear you, and we knew if we followed your voice we'd find our way home." The name had stuck, Not because it was flattering or clever, but because it was accurate. In the chaos of special operations, Victoria was the fixed point, the reliable guide, the voice that stayed calm when everything else was falling apart. She drove through the base's darkened streets, past the administrative buildings and barracks, past the training facilities where tomorrow new operators would learn the skills that might keep them alive downrange. The rain continued its assault, unrelenting. Victoria thought about all the young officers and enlisted personnel on this base and others, all the people learning to lead, to follow, to evaluate, to trust. How many of them, she wondered, were making the same mistakes Hastings had made tonight? How many were overlooking capability because it came in unexpected packaging? The truck's headlights cut through the darkness and rain, illuminating the road ahead in brief, brilliant flashes before the night swallowed everything again. It seemed like a metaphor for something, but Victoria was too tired for metaphors. She just wanted her coffee, her instant noodles, and about 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep before tomorrow's briefing. Her apartment was off base, a small one-bedroom that held little besides books, running gear, and a coffee maker that had survived 5 deployments and countless field exercises. Victoria parked and gathered her groceries, locking the truck with a decisive beep that echoed in the rain-soaked silence. Inside, she stripped off her wet clothes and stood under a hot shower until the chill finally left her bones. Later, sitting on her couch with the coffee brewing and noodles heating in the microwave, Victoria pulled up the mission files on her encrypted laptop. The horn extraction had gone clean, but she always reviewed every decision, every communication, looking for places where they could have been sharper, faster, more efficient. Perfection was impossible, but the pursuit of it was what kept operators alive. The after-action report showed the timeline clearly. The intelligence had been solid. The ingress route had worked as planned. The compound breach had taken 8 seconds, textbook execution. Hostage recovery had been smooth, all 18 civilians accounted for and moved to the secondary location. Egress had faced one complication when a patrol appeared earlier than expected, but the team had adapted, taking an alternate route Victoria had identified during mission planning as a contingency. 0 casualties, 0 compromise, 0 evidence left behind that American forces had been there. On paper, it was a perfect mission, but Victoria knew the truth. Perfection was a lie. There were always things that could have gone better. The patrol's early arrival suggested their intelligence on enemy patterns had been incomplete. The secondary egress route had taken them through an area with more civilian presence than ideal, increasing the risk of witnesses. One of the operators had reported his radio cutting out briefly during a critical moment, suggesting equipment issues that needed addressing. Victoria made notes for the brief tomorrow, flagging items for discussion, preparing to defend her decisions while simultaneously acknowledging where improvements were possible. This was the nature of after-action reviews in special operations. Brutal honesty in pursuit of excellence, ego checked at the door, rank less important than the quality of your analysis. Her microwave beeped. Victoria ate her noodles standing at the kitchen counter, reviewing satellite imagery of the compound on her laptop, cross-referencing operator positions with enemy movement patterns, building the narrative she would present to the admiral. The work was meditative in its focus, demanding enough to quiet the part of her brain that wanted to replay the commissary interaction, to analyze it for missteps or better responses. But that conversation kept intruding anyway. The look on Hastings' face when he realized who she was, the silence in the store, the weight of being a teaching moment when all she had wanted was coffee and sleep. Victoria had never wanted to be a symbol. She had wanted to be a SEAL, but the physical standards and institutional resistance had made that impossible when she had entered service 23 years ago. So she had become something else, something arguably more impactful, the tactical operations coordinator who guided SEAL teams through their missions. She had learned every aspect of special operations planning and execution. She had studied countless after-action reports. She had built relationships with operators based on competence and trust, and slowly, over years of consistent excellence, she had become indispensable. The title on her official record was Tactical Operations Commander, but the job was more complex than that suggested. She was part mission planner, part real-time strategic advisor, part communications hub, part calm voice in chaos. When a team was downrange, Victoria was their connection to intelligence updates, weather changes, rules of engagement clarifications, and higher command decisions. She was the person who saw the entire battlefield while they saw only their immediate tactical picture. And most critically, she was the person they trusted to guide them home when things went wrong. That trust didn't come from rank. It came from being right repeatedly under pressure when lives hung in the balance. Victoria finished her noodles and poured coffee, the rich smell filling her small apartment. She thought about tomorrow's brief, about standing in front of an admiral and explaining why every decision had been correct, or when it hadn't been, why the alternatives would have been worse. She thought about Hastings and whether he would actually learn from tonight or just remember it as an embarrassing encounter with a senior rank. She thought about all the young operators training right now, learning to trust their abilities and their teammates, building the skills that would define their careers and potentially their survival. The rain had stopped. Victoria looked out her window at the cleared night sky, stars visible for the first time in days. She thought about her call sign again. Lighthouse, a fixed point in the darkness, a guide home through dangerous waters. It was a heavy responsibility. But then again, everything about her job was heavy. The decisions that determined whether people lived or died. The knowledge that operators trusted her judgment more than they trusted their own eyes sometimes. The weight of excellence, of never being able to have an off day because off days in her world meant body bags and folded flags. Victoria sat in her quiet apartment, drinking coffee at midnight, and accepted that weight as she always had. Not because she wanted to be extraordinary, but because the job demanded it. Because operators downrange deserved someone who was always at their best, always reliable, always the lighthouse in the storm. She would brief the admiral tomorrow. She would recommend Hastings for the Joint Operations Working Group. She would continue doing the work that kept her up at night and gave her life meaning in equal measure. And somewhere on some future mission, her voice would come through someone's headset in a moment of chaos, steady and sure, guiding them home. That was who Victoria Reyes was. Not a symbol, not a teaching moment, just a professional doing the job at the highest level possible, regardless of who was watching or what assumptions they brought to the encounter. The coffee was strong and bitter and perfect. Victoria smiled slightly, alone in her apartment, and pulled up the next file that needed review. The work never stopped. The missions kept coming, and she would keep being the lighthouse, fixed and steady, no matter how dark the storm became. Tomorrow the base would still be talking about tonight. Next week the story would spread wider. Next month it would become legend. But Victoria wouldn't be there to hear most of it. She would be in operations centers and briefing rooms, on secure calls with team leaders and intelligence analysts, doing the unglamorous, essential work that happened far from cameras and recognition. She preferred it that way. Let others be famous. Let others seek recognition. Victoria had something better, the absolute trust of operators who depended on her judgment to stay alive. That trust was earned in silence, in countless small decisions made correctly, in the calm steadiness of her voice when everything was falling apart. It was enough, more than enough, it was everything. Victoria Reyes finished her coffee, closed her laptop, and finally allowed herself to sleep, knowing that in a few short hours she would wake and begin again, carrying the weight of excellence as naturally as breathing, being the lighthouse others navigated by, steady and reliable and always there, exactly where she was needed most. The work would continue. The missions would come. And she would be ready, as she always was, to guide people home through the darkness.